Do you even podcast, bro? This show takes a lot of time, and part of what keeps the lights on is if you consider hiring me to coach up a piece of your work. A generous editor helps you see what you can't see. It could be a pitch, a proposal, an essay, or hell, even a book. If you need help cracking the code, man, email me at creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com and we'll start a dialogue. New sponsor alert. This show is also brought to you by Disappoint. To fail, to fulfill the expectations or wishes of a person. Each time I submit a draft back to my editor, I disappoint him.
I don't know what I'm doing is such a refrain in my brain. And so I often picture, okay, if someone did know what they were doing, what would they do? And then I do that.
Oh, hey, CNFers, it's your little garden gnome of CNF, and this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to, primarily, writers about the craft of telling true story. Did I split an infinitive? That is a good name for a podcast, the Split Infinitive Podcast. You can contact me later about purchasing the domain. Just go get it. There might be some new dabblers to CNF Pod Multiverse since the Longford podcast picked up their microphones and went home after nearly 600 interviews over 12 years. Evan Ratliff, one of the heads of the three-headed beast, was nice enough to recommend this pod, this one right here, as a potential one to fulfill or fill the void left in the hearts of long-form diehards, myself one of them. So, do I fill my own holes? Wait, if you're new here, I'm something of an acquired taste. But when we get into it, man, I think you'll find that it's a good time overall, friend. Maggie Gigandet is here, and it's that Atavistian time of the month. Not much by way of spoilers here. So visit magazine.atavist.com to read Maggie's story, The Extra Mile, about a couple, the Barcelonas, Todd and Allison, as they race in Vol State, this 314-mile, 10-day ultra-marathon. It takes place largely in Tennessee, but also a little bit in Georgia. And anyway, it's a lot of miles, many days. Oh, and the blisters. It's a braided narrative that takes us into the incredible bond of Todd and Allison, a traumatic brain injury, not on the racetrack or course, but on something else, car accident, and the resilience it takes to finish a race and to be there for each other. Aw. Show notes to this episode and more at brendanamara.com, where you can also sign up for the companion Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. Each podcast gets a cute little newsletter now, since I'm not really on social media anymore. The newsletter, I've been doing it for more than a decade, but it was usually once a month, and now it's just, I'm just playing around. It's once a week right now. There's a too long, didn't listen mini transcript, the text from each episode's parting shot, a behind-the-scenes bullshit riff about my rotten head and even my more rotten writing. Then there's the first of the month Rager with cool links, book recommendations. It literally goes up to 11. But first, we're going to hear from Editor-in-Chief Seyward Darby. And as you know, these Atavistian things, we have the lead editor of the piece. So we get, in this case, her side of the table. We got a parting shot on disappointment. Tethers into our new sponsor. So let's get into it, CNFers. New and old riff. Well, speaking of the job you love, you've got this new piece that's got some, got some running, ultra running as a backdrop to it. So, was speaking and thinking of Maggie's piece. What is it about you that kind of struck you about it?
Yeah, well, so Maggie had approached us at least once before, saying she was interested in writing about ultra marathons, which I will confess, I don't really know anything about ultra marathons except they're very long, and obviously, in reading some of what she emailed, it was clear like there's an interesting culture here. There are interesting people here. But what I told her, if I recall correctly, was, we really need to find a narrative inside of it. It can't just kind of be, look at this world or look at this particular character, or, you need to find a story inside of it to make it work for the Atavist. And so she had identified that she wanted to write about this particular type of ultramarathon designed by this one man, Lazarus Lake, within the group of people who have kind of become devotees of his ultras. She found this couple that had this really compelling story of kind of overcoming odds. I think what I was interested in, certainly, we run a lot of true crime stories. We run a lot of stories that have some sort of legal dimension. And this is a story that doesn't have any of those things. It's really about family and love and, tragedy to a certain extent, but also sports. Like, it just had some elements that we probably don't do enough of in our stories.
Let's see. You've got, you have this like kind of braided narrative with the race and the Barcelonas. I'm always interested in the unique challenges that a story provides for you on your side of the table. So yeah, in what ways did this one, what was the puzzle you were looking to crack by and large for this piece?
Yeah, so it was absolutely the structure in this case. So the first draft came in, it was very clean. Maggie's a very, very nice writer, but it was way more just straight chronology. So if I recall correctly, it kind of opened with a scene where they were starting the race, the Vol State race, and then it jumped back into their backstory, but it just like went all the way through their backstory. So that then eventually they worked up to the race. And then the last like big chunk of the piece was the race. To me, it really lost momentum when it got to the race, because, the question obviously became, are they going to finish? But it was kind of like we've left all of that personal stuff behind to a certain extent. To be totally frank about these ultras, so this ultra is 314 miles. You have 10 days to finish it. It's just a slog, like it's not this, TikTok play-by-play, oh, wow, I'm really in the action. Like it's just one foot in front of the other. In really hot weather over, in some cases difficult, in some cases flat terrain. And so you were just kind of watching them slog for a really long time. And so Maggie and I talked about how we needed to find a way to restructure things to make it such that that the momentum didn't get sucked out of it, but also of the whole story, but also that the Vol State portion of things, kind of kept crackling, right? Like whenever we were in the Vol State of it all, we weren't just kind of like, okay, there we go, one step in front of the other, And so we talked about breaking up Vol State. And I can't remember exactly how it came to be that we decided on this sort of A-B structure. But ultimately, to me, it makes it a significantly more interesting narrative story to have these two, sort of plot lines that you're following, and ultimately they do coincide. And there's this one scene that I think is really moving that happened in the course of the Vol State race that I think really encapsulates kind of the Barcelona's love for each other, and what overcoming this awful ordeal, which was a car accident that really devastated Todd Barcelona's body, but also, gave him a traumatic brain injury. And he was told he'd probably never run again. Part of what overcoming that meant was, the actual physical of it all and learning to run again. But then the other piece of it was his relationship with his wife, and how, that kind of transformed over the course of that recovery. And ultimately, the way that the two parts of the braided narrative kind of come together is you really see very vividly, I think, how important and sort of almost inextricable they have become from each other because of everything they've been through. We talk a lot about sort of the engine of narrative, what's kind of driving a piece. And I think in this case, there are sort of two, each of the threads has its own engine. One of them being, are they going to finish this race, right? And then the other one being, what is it going to mean for him to overcome this ordeal? Because that he does, insofar as when the story starts, he's running an ultramarathon, right? So like we know that he gets back to running. But the question kind of becomes, what is it? First of all, what happened to him? So, we're going to go back and we're going to learn all of that, which is harrowing. But then what does overcoming that ordeal mean in a much more like existential sense? And so I think we answer both the question of the existential question, and then the question of, are they going to finish this insanely difficult race? So yeah, the AB structure was what we settled on, and I think that's like the thing that makes this story most special. Is it's like a purely braided story, and there's really like there's sort of a stanza quality to it.
Yeah, for sure. And there's only so much you can do, especially with endurance running as a storytelling element, because the tension in it is spread out over so long, and you can't do a play-by-play or a beat-by-beat. It would just get mundane.
Exactly.
So you really have to really lift out just the most integral parts that are trying to do work for you in a story, and it's and by braiding it like that, you really do get a sense of like, okay, here are those. You still feel like you had the race, but you just cherry picked like a couple minutes from it, even though it was like 30 million hours or however long it was.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Like you've got to kind of provide these snapshots. And those snapshots need to speak in some way to the wider story you're telling. So, certainly we start the race with the start of the race. So you see what's going on, you get sort of the establishing shot of it all, right? And then the second time we return to the race, they're passing through the very first town that they've come to on the course, kind of the shell of its former self. It was once upon a time, like Mark Twain said, it was the prettiest city on the Mississippi or something along those lines. And it's just really not that anymore. And there's kind of an allusion there to losing sense of self, kind of luster fading, which is a lot of what happened to Todd in his accident. So then, we don't make that connection super directly, but that's sort of what we're trying to do with that snapshot of the race. And then we go back into the backstory of what happened to him. And so then I'm trying to remember, like, the next snapshot of the race is kind of explaining how you actually survive. And you really see, if I recall correctly, Allison helping Todd through the race. And so you start to get the sense that, their relationship is very much one in which he leans on her. And then, you continue to get that in the backstory. So this is a long way of saying, like, each of the snapshots of the race is intended to, without beating you over the head with it, it is intended to speak to the existential story, right? And so even though you're very much in the moment, they're exhausted, they're hot, they're sweaty, they're gross, and you're just kind of watching them try to make it through. Something is going on in that scene that, from our perspective, was intended to provide like a very nice echo of what was going on in the other plot line. We'd like to think our readers are smart enough to know, what we're doing. But yeah, that's exactly right. And that was, what Allison is the name of one of the subjects. Maggie, the writer, that was what Maggie and I worked really hard on structure wise. And she was so game for it and like excited to pull it apart and then figure out how to put the puzzle pieces back together so that it created a new picture. That's always fun for me as an editor, like it's not just line by line. It's how can we really, really tell this story with the materials we have in hand in the best possible way.
Very nice. Well, Seyward, as always, it's so good to get your side of the table, and we'll kick it over to Maggie now to get her sense of what this piece is about and the journey of this piece, so to speak. So thanks for the time, as always.
Thanks so much, Brendan.
All right. That was great. I always love talking to Seyward and Jonah, but today it was Seyward, okay? Okay. All right, a little more about Maggie. She was a trial attorney, and she turned her back on that field to pursue freelance writing and journalism. She's written about people's crazy obsessions, and chief among them, ultramarathons. Her works appeared now in the Atavist, Gear Junkie, among others. She does not run ultras, but there's something about the people who do that she finds fascinating, and you'll find that out firsthand. We also talk about Red paperclipping her way to journalism, how she used the Write or Die app to help do this piece. What else? Finding the fun, chasing yeses. You can find her at Maggie Gigandet Gigandet.com or on LinkedIn, Maggie Gigandet. That's Gigandet. This is my meandering way of saying this is a cool conversation, all right? All right, but so I understand, like, so you're a former trial attorney. So how'd you get into journalism?
Well, yes, I practiced law as a prosecutor for several years and dealt with a range of cases, some very disturbing subject matter. And, after a while, I just needed a change and decided to try something else. So I did a year in market research at a marketing research firm, then decided that's not the answer either. I left that job at the very end of February 2020. And so within weeks, everyone was at home, and it actually worked out because it gave me a lot of time to figure it out. And at the time, I didn't even realize freelance writing was a thing. And I remember the day when I realized it, and I walked into the kitchen and told my husband, yeah, so like you can come up with an idea and then you can send it to an editor and then they might say yes. So my plan was I would continue looking for jobs, and this freelancing sounded fun. So I do that in the meantime. And then eventually I just stopped looking for jobs.
Wow. So a lot of times it can be a big challenge to gain traction in freelance journalism. But speaking personally, and also a lot of other people I talk to, just getting those early wins and that early momentum is very, very challenging. So so how did you accomplish that and get that early momentum and the traction you needed to get the flywheel moving?
Yes, that was exactly my experience. I like to say that I started out with nothing. I had no experience. I did not have a journalism degree. I did not have contacts. I did not have a portfolio. And I had next to no knowledge of how the industry worked. So what I did was, one of the good things about being stuck at home when COVID hit was everyone and their brother started doing free webinars. And so I watched, if it was even remotely interesting to me, I watched it. And I was looking for what topics am I interested in? And then a lot of it was, on the business and industry of freelance writing. So I started gaining knowledge then. Basically, one of my first hurdles was I didn't have a portfolio, and I didn't know, but everyone said, okay, send your clips, so we can see if we want the story. So how am I supposed to get any clips if no one will take my story in the first place? But to do that, I need clips.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah. A lot of what I've had to do is, I don't know what I'm doing is such a refrain in my brain. And so I often picture, okay, if someone did know what they were doing, what would they do? And then I do that. So I built a portfolio, and to get traction, it really felt like, are you familiar with the One Red Paperclip project?
No.
It was a Canadian man did it several years ago, and he wanted to see what he could get, starting with, he had one little red paperclip. So he traded that for like a pin, and then he traded that for something else. And eventually he ends up with a house. And that is the closest I can get to what it felt like trying to build a career from nothing. I often felt like I was taking my transferable skills from my law career, and I was like making trades, just ever so slightly getting a little bit more experience or a little bit more, credibility, if you will. I'm still there, but I would at least think I'm not dealing with a paperclip anymore.
Right. What were some of the transferable skills that you took from your law career that applied to journalism?
As a trial attorney, I had a lot of experience, years of experience. And of course, I'd been trained in law school, researching, writing, and interviewing skills, which is lucky because that's mostly what I do now. I also sort of used that in the beginning, like, because I'm coming from, I have an unusual start in the field. Maybe that's something that I can write about. And so one of my strategies to get a portfolio together was, I initially thought I might be interested in editing. So I joined some editing associations and wrote an article for one newsletter of the association on the similarities between editing and the legal field. And so I just basically used anything I could to start doing work for free, basically, to get the portfolios. But basically, it was built on those 3 skills.
Yeah, there's always the kind of a push and pull between doing work for free and or insisting on doing it for pay. But is that advice you would offer someone who, like, obviously you need those clips in a portfolio, and sometimes the only way to do it is to do it for free, so you have a body of work to show people. Is that how you would counsel people most likely?
I can say it worked for me, and I know that's such a controversial thing in the freelancing world. I'm not advocating, doing it for free, but I didn't have an option. I didn't have anything. I had to. So I did start out doing it for free. But then I quickly, once I got what I needed, I stopped. And from then on, I only did paying projects. And then after a while, once I built up more of a portfolio and more experience, then I set a minimum fee for myself. I don't accept anything under a certain amount. To me, it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. And it can be a thing that, even though it's not paying, it might still have some value for you.
So how do you lock into the Barcelonas in this story that you wrote for the Atavist?
It actually started years and years ago. I got a bit addicted to reading about ultramarathons and just following them in general. That all started, I'm very a big supporter of the Tennessee state parks. I love the parks. I had a Google alert set for anything about the parks. And so I saw something there one day on the Barkley Marathons, which is a very famous, internationally known ultra designed by Lazarus Lake, who is the creator of Vol State, and in my piece. And I got to go and actually watch part of the marathons, and it was amazing, and I was hooked. And so I went back again the next year, but to a different one of his ultras. So that would have been the summer of 2022. I was following his HOTS race, which is mentioned in the piece. I had convinced someone, I'd been trying to convince an outlet for a long time to let me cover one of these races. And eventually I convinced one, Gear Junkie. It was like 2 weeks before the race started. So I get there, and I had never covered something like this. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to talk to as many people as I can. The morning of the race, I went to the breakfast bar in the hotel, and I saw this couple, and they were both sitting on the same side of the booth together, and the other side was empty. And I went up and introduced myself, and it was Todd and Allison. And I asked them, why do you run ultras? And then that was the beginning.
But yes, yeah, this piece, it's at the intersection of traumatic brain injury, among other things, like relationships and kind of the healing power of endurance sport and ultra running. So, what was it about their story that you really, locked into? You're like, oh, there's a lot here worth unpacking.
To me, it was because their story adds an extra layer to a subject that is already just mind-boggling to me. Like, just even someone who's never been in any sort of never had any sort of physical injuries, or someone who's completely and 100% healthy, I understand a little better now. But why would you do that? Why would you put yourself through these extreme conditions? And I mean, it's not like you're competing for money, or it's just you get there and then that's it. You've done it. Like, why? And so that's fascinating to me. And then finding out Todd's story and Allison's story, and knowing he had really serious physical injuries to overcome, that just adds even an extra layer to me. Like, I can't imagine doing it myself, and I'm, out of shape, granted, but healthy. I can't imagine doing it in his, with what he's had to overcome. So it was just very curious to know, why are you here?
When you were reporting on them and following them, what was it about? Like, what did you see, like, in them and shadowing them that you found, all the more intriguing, given that there are, dozens and dozens of people you could have chosen, but it was like there was something about them that you found particularly intriguing?
Well, so from the first minute I met them, sitting in that hotel breakfast room, they're very, very quiet people. They're very soft spoken. You know, you really have to kind of dig around to get them to tell you their story. I mean, so and then when they would describe how Todd changed after the wreck, it's kind of hard to believe because he just seems so calm and quiet, and so that was one thing that really attracted me. And the other thing was, as we're sitting in the breakfast room, and he's telling me, I mean, I probably only talked to them for about 20 minutes, but he's telling me about what it was like after the wreck, and he started crying and was really struggling, to control his emotions. I mean, this was at that point maybe 8 years after the wreck, and it just comes back like that. So it's very hard not to want to know more about their story, because you can tell it was such a huge part of their lives, and it's still so present with them.
Yeah, and what I found particularly striking about it was while he was on the mend, the degree of jealousy and envy and even resentment that he felt towards his wife, who could go out and run, and here he was basically bedridden and on sort of this medical house arrest, if you will. That was I thought a particularly interesting thread, and I don't know about you, but it was what was maybe a challenge in reporting that out.
Not just for that part, but also for the whole thing was, it's been, this is the 10 years since that happened. So just the passage of time, but then also, because Todd had sustained a traumatic brain injury, he can have trouble remembering things at times. And Allison has a really great memory, but Allison was at work during those days. So you get the idea from him about what it was like trying to recreate a particular scene and put the reader there. It's a bit more than just it's been a long time since then. Even his memory may not be the best thing to rely on through no fault of his own. So that was hard.
Yeah, it is. As someone I've recreated various things with like police reports and whatnot. Was that something you leaned on to really evoke that scene a bit more?
Yes, well, to evoke all the scenes, I really had to wring much information as I possibly could out of the documents I found and the sources I found, because I quickly realized, so it's years ago. Some police records had been destroyed because they only keep them for a certain amount of years, and that was long gone. So I managed to find both police officers, or law enforcement officers, the highway patrol officer who responded to the scene, and then the officer who responded to the rear ending that happened in 2017 to Todd. They didn't remember. I mean, how many of these scenes do they see, every day? So it was people's memories were not there, records were gone. I had located some documents, but was not given permission to look at them. So I had to depend on what I did have. A key witness, I believe, had since passed away. I mean, so there were a lot of difficulties, but I also got really lucky. Finding the Matthewses was a boon. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't have found them. So
Oh, hi there, CNFers. The Matthews that Maggie refers to are witnesses to the car accident that Todd Barcelona experienced, and likewise providing a lot of color and firsthand account of this traumatic accident. So there you have it.
you kind of have to, there's so much I would have loved to have seen, but also I have to remind myself I'm so lucky in what I did get to see. I combed 400 pages of medical records for anything about how they were reacting and how they were surviving the hospital stay. So just persistence, really.
Right. And when it comes to medical records, is that something that you have to procure from the Barcelonas, or is that publicly available?
No, I had to look up the hospital's procedures on getting the right forms signed. Todd signed those forms, and allowed me to see his stack of medical records. I went to the hospital and dealt with that, and I got a disc in the mail, and so it's like, be careful what you wish for, because now I had 400 pages, and that was not his. That was his whole hospital stay, and maybe like 2 doctor visits after he left. Yeah, so I just had to really search to find all the good details that I wanted to have.
Yeah, and given that the major backdrop of this is this ultra race that you've kind of got the two braiding threads, kind of the accident narrative braiding around the race itself, which I think is a very effective strategy for the piece of this nature. When you're dealing with endurance athletes of some kind, what is the draw for you to the ultra marathon community? Because this isn't the first time you've written about it, so I wonder. There's something about them that you really lock into.
You're absolutely right, and I have asked myself this, like, why are you so fascinated with this? I even sometimes I promise my husband, okay, I won't mention ultra marathon again today. I promise. It's just, I think it has to be a combination of the people who choose to run these races are fascinating. I'm sure if I had stopped at a different table in the breakfast room and talked to someone else, I could have come up with, another really great story. So they're filled with fascinating people, really generous people, and who are clearly passionate about what they do and want to talk to you. Lazarus Lake, the founder of all these races, is, in my opinion, he's a genius, and it is so. I don't think I could ever be bored of listening to him or learning about him. He's very interesting. And then just like I don't understand why people would voluntarily do this. That is so interesting to me, and it fit right in with, I have an overarching interest in people with interesting passions. So I have written about other things. I've written about champion marble players. People who are really interested in something and skilled fascinate me, and I think this was like, ultras are like the perfect storm. And that's the best that I've come up with about what got me so addicted to it.
Yeah. Well, I know there are certain subjects that I'm drawn to, mainly people of like great singular devotion. And I think a lot of that has to do with, like, I wish I was a bit more singularly devoted to just about anything. And I admire that in people. So I see it as something of a deficiency in mine that I'm drawn to people who have the trait I so desire. It is, is that something you find too? You just like, there's something in them that you wish you had?
That's a good question. I don't think it's quite the same for me, because I will never run or walk or crawl an ultra ever, which is something I didn't realize when I first met people at the beginning of a race. Everyone like really seriously tries to convince you to do it. I think I'm just so interested in knowing why people are doing certain things. Like, for instance, my favorite genre to read is biography, but specifically of interesting people who are not famous. If they're famous, that doesn't interest me. So I don't know, maybe I need like a counseling session to really dive into why this is, but it just hit on so many interesting things for me all at once that I kind of got addicted to it.
But running in and of itself is kind of a fascinating subject to write about. Just there's a lot metaphorically you can pull on, and so like, how did you resonate with running just as a subject matter?
I think what you just said, there's so much that it resonates with metaphorically, and I think that ultimately gets at what I've cobbled together as my answer for why they do this. And it's not like another event where you're covering someone and they do something and they finish the game, and you've seen them and maybe they're really skilled, and then you all go home. There are a lot of transformations that happen, and there's so many layers to people that you get to see through running. and especially in running in these sort of extreme conditions. So I think it's fascinating to see everyone at the start of the race, see them, as you drive past them in your air conditioned car and they're struggling, and you feel really bad for them. And then to see them triumphant at the end, like to see their whole, it's a story in itself, every single race from every runner, So you get to see a whole story by following these ultras.
Yeah, there's an element of deliverance that happens, with these, and it is over the course of these hallucinatory types of endurance experiences that, people do come out sometimes quite literally transformed in some ways.
Oh yeah, and hallucinations are one of my favorite things to hear about in ultras, and people run these for all kinds of reasons, and we kind of get into it a bit in the piece. Coach Leathers says, you need to have experienced trauma and overcoming it in order to be able to run them. And I think that's true for some people. I think there are some psychological reasons why they're running them, something in their past. And then, of course, I asked Laz, why do people run ultras? And his answer was, because humans are meant to try. And, so there's that. People will often tell you, I wanted to see if I could do it, which would explain the first time you did it, but not the 5th time or the 10th time. And then the last thing for me that I realized why people did this was some people just really enjoy it. It's, in a marathon, time is of the essence, and these are more social races.
I like what you just said about what Laz said about what humans are meant to try, and extrapolating that or overlaying that on your life. What is the nature of your try? What you're after, be it athletically or just through your journalism and your writing.
Yeah, it's definitely through my launching myself into this career. That is my try. And it's funny that you pick up on that, because I had never, the longest piece I had written before this one was 2,500 words. And it was one of those things like, you're sort of so inexperienced that you don't know what you're getting into. And when I found out that I was doing this for the Atavist, I was ecstatic. I was so excited. And then months later, after I followed the race and I'm like, okay, I have to write it now. Then it starts dawning on me. And then other, colleagues, when they find out how long it is, their reactions, I was like, why does everyone keep reacting that way? You sort of realize what you got into. So because I had only done shorter pieces before, this is the longest I've ever stayed on a piece. And eventually I started thinking of it as, this is my ultra. This is my writing ultra. And I had a conversation with Laz. I interviewed him last fall for this piece. He has such a way with words. So I told him, before Vol State, there's something that it's called the Last Supper. And everyone meets at a Chinese buffet restaurant in Union City, and it's to give them instructions and that kind of thing. And Laz gave a speech to the crowd, and he ended it with, I'm not going to lie to you for the next 5 minutes. This is going to be hard. And he concluded his speech by saying, after 40 years of watching this race, there's one difference between the people who finish and those who don't. The finishers didn't quit. And I had that in my mind the whole time. By the time I interviewed Laz in the fall, I was really starting to question my ability to finish this. And I said, I keep reminding myself about what you said at the Last Supper. And we had just been talking about the Bench of Despair. I was learning about the lore and the history of the bench. And I said, you know what? Maybe I'm on my own bench of despair, and I've got to decide, I'm either going to just quit or I'm going to get up and finish this thing. And he said to me, you are on the bench of despair. You can either get in your car, go home, and regret it for the rest of your life, or you can get up and keep going and regret it for the rest of the race. And he was talking to me just like a runner. And it was at that moment I was like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm going to keep going. But yeah, that's so I thought of this whole thing as my own ultra, and that helped.
That it really is great counsel, and there are any number of doubts that creep in over the course of generating a piece, even in the reporting of the piece, and just over the course of this, how did you get into the right headspace to endure and to push through when you might otherwise have driven away and regretted it?
Well, I had to find ways to work around myself. Once I started, it started dawning on me just how big this project was. The only thing I could hear in my brain was, I can't do this. I can't write 8 to 10,000 words, which is what the brief was. I mean, I literally could not come up with anything else, and I was worried that I was going to get paralyzed. So what I did was I said, okay, fine. You don't write an 8 to 10,000 word piece. Write a 1,000 word piece and just do it 8 to 10 times. And for some reason that helped me. So I had to come up with a very specific system. You always hear around New Year's resolutions, like, come up with little steps. And so I had to break everything down into each. I separated the story into like 8 to 10 subjects, and then I broke those down into specific steps. And it ends, the steps end with each section with going on Ride or Die. Have you used that?
I haven't. No. Tell me about it.
Oh my gosh. I just use the free version. Sorry, Ride or Die people, but it is amazing. So you go on and I think it's rideordie.com, and you can set like, okay, I want to write 500 words. I want to do it in X amount of minutes. And so that calculates, you need to be writing these amount of words per, block of time. And you can go kamikaze mode or not. I always go kamikaze mode. That is it. So it says, okay, you set everything, and then you hit a button and it says write, and you just start writing, and you can't stop, because if you stop writing, the screen starts slowly getting redder and redder. And because you put it on kamikaze mode, there's this horrendous screeching that comes in your ears, and it really kicks you into writing again. And if you start writing, it goes away. And I had to do it because my one goal was, after I had outlined a section, was, okay, just write it in full English sentences. They don't have to be good, just have to be full sentences. And because I figured if I could get myself to a first draft, editing would be no problem. So that was a major tool. The whole thing was written with Ride or Die.
Oh, that's great. A lot of writers have their own idiosyncrasies to kind of get into the mode, be it a kind of ritual or whatever. So, for you, when when you've got your raw material, you're in your notes and stuff, what do you like to have in place to kind of warm up the engine and so you can get going?
Coffee. If I don't have a cup of coffee sitting next to me, for some reason that really affects my brain. I must have that. I have, when I'm not listening to the Ride or Die screeching, nails on a chalkboard sound, I go on Spotify. I have a playlist of instrumental. It's just instrumental, and I specifically didn't want any classical music because I didn't want to be able to recognize any of it, because I didn't want my brain saying, oh, I wonder, is this Beethoven? And then going and looking. And I only listen to that playlist when I'm writing, because I'm trying to train my brain. This is writing time.
Yeah. ACNFers, well, how at times I ask the guest for a recommendation of some kind at the end of the show, and this one will be no different. But given that we're talking about music and writing about the various playlists, let me just say, Spotify playlist, listening to whale songs, it's pretty cool. I highly recommend it. It's got this moaning, ethereal, almost interplanetary kind of feel, but it's in the ocean. Just trust me. Trust me on that one.
So, yeah, and I always write at my desk. I have a big recliner in my office, but I can't write there.
Well, I'm pretty sure, I don't know if this is still the case, but I'm pretty sure Dave Eggers has just like an old laptop that's not connected to the internet at all, and like that's his composing laptop. And I think when Seth Godin, who writes he's a prolific writer, he's had a daily blog post anywhere from 100 words to 1,000 words or whatever for years and years and years, comes out every day. When he opens up his whatever program he blogs into, like that's the mode of like, oh, when I'm in this program, this is all I do. I write here. So there are all these little things that help us get into that headspace. And it's always, I just love hearing how people not trick themselves, but the things they put into place that like, oh, when like you've got your coffee and you've got that music. It's like, okay, now that is like a cue that you're in it. And, you know, until you're ready to pull out of that moment.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm so glad to hear you say that because I mean, I thought like, you're going to think this is so weird. I'm telling them I have to trick my own brain to get my brain to work, but I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. Yeah, you know, and like I think for me with coming from the fact that I don't have I sort of just announced one day I was a freelance writer and off I went. Like I hear a lot of you know, like, oh, I can't do this, or there's a problem, and then, you know, like I don't know what to do. And I have to kind of sit myself back, you know, come up with what would someone who knows what they're doing do? And then of course I always have a pad next to me with a pen, and I really rely on that when I'm getting myself stuck. I break it down and I write down like task 1 because I love to cross things off too, so it's kind of like a little treat for me, you know.
Very satisfying.
You get to
yeah.
cross it off as you go. Yeah.
I'm glad you're kind of bringing some of this stuff up because given that you don't have this traditional path through journalism, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that goes on there. And that's it's natural. Even people who are pretty seasoned at this, when they kind of level up to, say, an atavistian kind of word count and the ambitious storytelling that it takes to do that, it can feel like you can't measure up. So when that voice creeps into your head, you know, how do you quell that voice or turn the volume down on it?
I don't try to fight it. I say fine. Like I told myself, fine. Then don't write an 8,000 to 10,000 piece. Find something you can do, and I don't care how small it is. And for me, that was I can write 1,000 words. I know I can. To me, I had to find something in my experience that I could say you can do it because you have done it. And so it was like breaking things down really helps me. I also, this sounds a bit corny, but I also remind myself, you know, I've had another career in another field, and so much of my job now I would be doing if I won the lottery. Now, honestly, I don't know if I'd be writing as much or as long, but I still would be out wanting to see these things, wanting to meet these people and learn about things. And so it does help to say, would you like to go back to, you know, I do a lot of talking to myself in my head. Would you like to go back to what you were, you know, doing before? Like, no, okay. It helps to put it into perspective. Like my current problem is not overwhelming.
Right. And, you know, given that you pivoted from law to journalism, you know, a lot of people go the other way around because they get kicked out of journalism and they're like, oh, I can go to law school or something. But going to law school and then going to like freelance journalism, there's a sunk cost element to it. Like you invested all that time and money into a different kind of degree. And how were you able to kind of, you know, break out of that sunk cost idea to pursue something that is far more nourishing for you?
Yes, you're exactly right with student loans, and it becomes yes, I'll just say you're right on that. It was really, really hard, and I almost didn't intentionally mean to. It happened over a period of months, I would say. So I just was burnout of the legal field. I was in Kentucky at the time and was going to move to Nashville to be with my now husband. And so I did the whole, you know, looking for a job, get a whole Tennessee law license and looking for a job here. And I found myself on Indeed, like I wonder if I typed in something other than law. I'm just gonna see, like just let me look. And so I figured that was kind of a signal, like there's a reason that you're looking for other things, and I decided to try it. I tried a job in another field, and that was not something I wanted to stay with. And so I thought, oh, I've really messed up now, because what am I gonna do? But I remember was walking down the street and I saw a poster. This was in my job before freelance writing, and it said something about getting a job that pays a lot of money. You need to stop and think, it's paying you a lot of money, but how much is it costing you? And that really resonated with me, because I felt like what I had been looking for was costing me a lot, and in time and stress levels, and so that helped. And then, of course, I don't want to misrepresent myself, and I am not advocating for anyone to just quit their job. And I would not be able to do it if it weren't for my husband. So that was something that we had to discuss. As I'm building a career, it was something that we discussed, and we decided to do, and has worked out really well for us.
Yeah, that's a good point to underscore. I like to do that too. Like, my wife has a steady, well-paying job with the health insurance. It allows me to do what I do, which is really up and down. And, if it wasn't for her, other times in my career, I've really had to subsidize the journalism I wanted to do with, like, stocking produce at Whole Foods, or some landscaping sometimes. One of my award-winning features, not bragging, but one of the feature I won an award for, like, I was doing reporting on a phone, like, during my lunch break as a landscaper. It was like 100 degrees out in Jersey City, and I'm like in the shade on the phone, like scribbling like hell in my notebook. And, that turned into a feature that, just won a little regional magazine award. And it's sometimes you when you really like these kind of things, you gotta spackle in the holes elsewhere, because it doesn't pay a lot on its own. Hopefully it will down the road, when you get into this mess. But it's a lot of us in freelance journalism. It's good to acknowledge the privilege of, like, the spouse with the steady job, which allows us to kind of navigate the rocky, turbulent waters of freelancing.
Yeah, I think it's just everyone has to consider for themselves and their own situation what works. But
Yeah.
it's particularly frustrating. I feel like freelance journalism is such. I know, obviously, I'm not biased, but because I'm a freelance journalist as well. But it's such a service, and I feel like it's not always seen that way by people who give you the yeses. And I am not talking about the Atavist here. They were very fair and wonderful. But I just feel like it's such a struggle in some areas, and doesn't or shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it drives a lot of people out because it's unsustainable. And I've had conversations with people where it's almost like doing a long form features is almost akin to being a short story writer. It's just like, it's, oh, you like writing short stories? It's kind of like a hobby. Okay, so you kind of do this. If you can make a few bucks, great. Otherwise, you're doing it because there's a compulsion to do it, not because it's like this lucrative career where you can actually retire or something. It's like, there's something burning inside you that you got to get out.
Yeah, and again, I want to be clear, the Atavist has been wonderful. They are not included in what I just said. They have been more than fair, and so, but it's, for me, it's not like, I kind of take a different approach. To me, it's just fun. I just love finding these people. So I have a theory that I think most people that you pass by on the street every day are experts in something. Be that a particular, kitchen skill, or a particular TV show, or something. I mean, I wonder how many people I'm passing by every day that are absolutely fascinating that I don't get to talk to. So for me, this is just fun. I'm having a lot of fun. So
oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, there are always pluses and minuses.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and it's keeping it as light as possible and having fun with it can certainly help, just endure the grind of it at times too.
Yeah.
So like when you can find those things you can really lock into, it's it makes it bearable. When it does feel like the ceilings are just collapsing all around you, like shit, and then you're like. But when you are truly enjoying it and like that discovery process of the reporting and everything, it's like, okay, this is my why for why I'm doing this.
Yeah, I feel like I've also I've gotten very attached to a yes. Like it's like chasing this yes for me. Like my brain now is now trained. Everything that happens to me, something in the back of my head is, how can I make this into a story? Or maybe I could pitch this to so and so. And it's because you send an email or a pitch and you hope you perfectly crafted it, and then just waiting for that to come back, and like you get a yes and it's such a high, and then so you try it again, and of course you go through a lot of no's before you get the next yes. But it's just like a built-in endorphin boost, I think.
What's the nature of your pitching process? How many you've got in the fire? How you're finding story ideas? How many you're throwing out at one time? How are you navigating just the nature of pitching?
I'm pitching all the time, and I always have multiple pitches out there that I'm waiting to hear back on. I mean, I haven't quite figured out, like you said, like it's sort of a feast or famine situation. Like I either have a bunch of interest and then I'm sitting here thinking, what have I done to myself? How am I going to write all this? Or I'm like, is my computer even working? Maybe something's wrong with my email. So I haven't quite figured out how to even it out yet, but I've sort of arranged things where I don't have to sit around and think, what should I pitch now? Because I'm interested in parks, a long time ago, I subscribed to newsletters from every single park system in the country, national parks. Anytime I come across something that is interesting, I sign up for a free newsletter. So as you can imagine, I get a lot of mail. But every morning, one of the things I do is I go through my email and I'm skimming, like, subject lines, and sometimes I see something I think that's interesting, and then I'll find out who I can email them, kind of see if there's something there, interview, do some pre-research, and then pitch. And let's see. And then also I have found, I've always said I'll do this, but I've never, had magically enough time. Like I'd like to sit down and do like a chart. How many of my published stories have come from the Tennessee state parks in some way? And I found just in Tennessee, so many people doing interesting things with endangered animals, and you'll be researching, one story, and they'll just happen to mention, oh, so-and-so's doing, this research. So then I go and do a story on that. I'm going to be working on a story later this summer that I think is, I've already done this will be my fourth article. And I have a blog post as well that comes from one accidental meeting with someone. So for me, I mean, it's kind of like try to get the most bang for your buck. Like after you're done interviewing someone, I kind of think about like, what else could I write about from here? What else did they mention? And then follow up. Nice.
And you had mentioned that during the height of the pandemic, you were watching a lot of webinars and so forth. But were there anyone in particular that you were turning to for counsel or advice to get that traction that we were talking about earlier? Someone in your corner, a community.
Absolutely. Have you heard of a group called the Society of Freelance Journalists? It's on Slack.
On Slack? No, I haven't heard of that.
Okay. Then I would sign up for that. That is such a wonderful resource. It was started it started in the UK. So it's a very UK, there are a lot of UK members, but it's gotten to the point where it's very international now. It was started by 4 journalists during COVID to help the community, and it's just grown. And they're wonderful because you can people post opportunities like, so-and-so is calling for pitches, that kind of thing. But then also I don't have anyone else. I don't know anybody else who does my job in real life. or that I know well enough that I could be like, this thing happened and I don't know what to do. And so I I post, a message on there, and then people from all over the world say, well, that happened to me and this is what I did.
Oh,
And
nice.
so, yeah, they're wonderful.
Oh, that's cool. Well, very
And it's
nice.
free also, by the way.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Extra bonus there.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Maggie, like as I bring these conversations down for a landing, I always love asking the guests for a recommendation of some kind, just anything you're excited about for the listeners out there. It just it could be a kind of a brand of notebook you really like, pencil, or a book you're reading, or just a brand of coffee. So I would just extend that to you. What are you excited about that you would recommend for the listeners?
I would like to recommend, if you have a public library that you're a member of, check and see if they have the Libby app, Libby. Because of course it has, audiobooks and ebooks, which is great. But the thing that I think is so cool is, you can read magazines, national titles, local magazines for free through that app. I even have it set up where I get an email when the latest issues of certain magazines I'm interested in are available. And so another great free tool to stay up to date on, if you have a dream magazine, what a wonderful way to become a regular reader and see, here's what they publish, here's their style. It gives you so much information that you can use, and so I recommend that to everyone.
Yeah, that's great, and that's so. As a freelance journalist, it's so important, especially aspiring ones. If you have that goal publication, you need to really read them and know them inside and out. You need to know if they've already run a story of that nature in the past, and you gotta. It can take a while to get a sense of what a publication is about. You can't just read one issue and be like, "Oh, okay, now I know it." You kind of have to be with them for several months, if not longer, to get a sense of like, oh yeah, this story idea I have, like I know exactly who would be a really good fit for it, and that'll come through in a pitch too.
Yeah, and exactly. It gives you an edge, and if you can do that for free, then why not?
Absolutely. Well, nice, Maggie. It's this is a wonderful conversation. So I just thank you so much for the cool, inspiring story for the Atavist, and yeah, thanks for coming on the show and talking shop.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, thanks to Seyward, of course. Thanks to Maggie. You can go to magazine.atavist.com to read Maggie's story, and also consider subscribing to The Atavist. For like $25 a year, you get the blockbuster piece of journalism right to your inbox, basically. I mean, I guess. I mean, there's a newsletter and there's a link, all that stuff. I don't get any kickbacks. We're just friends. Friends with pod benefits, right? Is that inappropriate? Probably. Parting shot. All right, so we're down the last month with this Prefontaine book. For those of you who don't know, I'm writing a Steve Prefontaine biography, a famous runner. All right, so give or take a day or so, got like a month to go before this really needs to be locked in for copy edits. Legal, all that shit. My editor, to his credit, is still excited about the book. Even said the sales team's excited about it, which is all the more terrifying, but also encouraging, right? But I get the sense he's like a coach who is like watching his athlete just flub through drills, like spinning the wrong way, and he's just deeply wondering, like, my God, like why can't this kid spin the right way or dribble with one hand? It's not that hard. Here's an example. Okay, there's a moment in 1970 cross country championships, NCAAs, and one of Prefontaine's rivals, not really a rival, but kind of up here, let's call him up here, he decides he's going to sprint to the front of the field and lead nationals through like the first half mile to a mile. Not because he can win, but because historically Track and Field News always put the stampede of the field on the cover of the magazine. So he wanted to just sprint to the field, lead nationals, not because he can win, but because he wanted to get on the cover of Track and Field News. It's a joke to him. After the first mile or so, Pre catches up to this guy and he just looks at him. He's like, what the fuck you doing? And just keeps going. Carries on. It's a great, funny little scene unto itself. But my editor made this connection I didn't see coming. And I think he's mildly bummed that I don't see these types of things throughout the course of the book. It's happened numerous times, and it will continue to happen until we're done. To everybody else, getting to the lead like that is a joke. Also, to Pre at the time, his competition was a joke. And boom, that is the bigger meaning and interpretation that you can extract from scenes that elevate them beyond mere points on the space-time continuum. And this is making the late-stage revisions particularly stressful because I wrote through the chronology, but biographies are more than just chronology. The author has to have the courage to wield some power by calling attention to certain events and, given the glut of research, interviews, and so forth, make assertions. The author, spending so much time on a particular subject, is an expert on that. It just is, by the virtue of how much you're immersed in it. And this isn't to say that when you're making assertions that it's like an agenda, though I'm sure some authors do have an agenda. But if the author doesn't bring their point of view, their point of reference, a shaping, then you might as well just read a Wikipedia page. Yet when viewed through this prism, leaves naturally fall off the tree. You know, this cool vignette, while neat, while likely very well researched and laboriously crafted, isn't doing any real work for the book, so I guess it's gotta go. Maybe for someone else's book and someone else's interpretation, it would be more germane, but not mine. So my editor challenged me to bring a similar eye to my work that I do for my podcast reading, that getting behind the microscope and seeing how the atoms are bonding. It was cute that he called the pod my day job. I mean, it would be cool if it paid even a part-time wage. It takes the time of a day job. Anyway, that's my failure as a business person, and neither here nor there. He's got a great point. But weathering the disappointment is tough for me in my particular headspace because you want to put a stamp on something because it's ready, because it's great. Not merely because it's got to get done. We're at that point where done is good enough. I don't like that. I don't like the idea of that. And there's a part of me that's not even 100% sure it'll be published because of my failure to make these kinds of bigger picture assertions and observations, which, if we're being honest, is not a great place to create and compose from. I'm writing more out of fear than joy. All that said, it is coming together. It's distilling in the soup of photochemicals. I'm moving things that are more thematically germane closer together and not merely as sequences on the timeline. Trying to draw out a satisfying arc as to who this guy was and why he was the dawn of a new athlete and why he was, in a sense, the last amateur athlete, and why he was, in many ways, ahead of his time, and why he still matters today. Do that in 3 weeks, B.O. Otherwise, if you can do, interview C.